Good day, everybody. We're going to get started. Welcome so much to this webinar. We have about 200 people signed up. I am so glad that we're able to reach you. People for Bikes is a national nonprofit dedicated to helping you build the infrastructure and change the policies in your communities to make your community the best place in the world to ride a bicycle. We're also the National Trade Association for the bike industry. So I want to thank our trade association members for helping to make this possible. Let's go ahead and get started with our presentation. This This is the last in a series of webinars that dig into the Great Bike Infrastructure Project. The Great Bike Infrastructure Project is People for Bikes initiative to build the infrastructure to make it easy and safe for everybody to ride a bicycle for transportation and recreation. The Great Bike Infrastructure Project has three parts. The first is a national database of more than 1,700 bike infrastructure projects around the country. You can see a chart and the map on our website. Find the projects in your community and let us help you get them built. You can contact us and we can send an action alert or write a letter of support as necessary to get these projects through their status from merely proposed to built so that people can enjoy them. Another piece of the Great Bike Infrastructure Project is our legislative strategy guide. It provides policy language for the four priorities that we think are the most important to get bike infrastructure built, language from diverse communities so that your policymakers can find something that will work for them. And the third element is our local investment. In select communities, we will invest substantially in the advocacy necessary to build an ambitious bikeway network. The idea is to get communities over that hump to the tipping point where bicycling becomes so commonplace that advocacy momentum in that community is unstoppable. This webinar digs into the legislative strategy guide. As I said, there's four priorities in that guide. The first and most important is money. We give a lot of examples of how you can get state and local funding to supplement national funding to build bike infrastructure. Another priority is complete street policies that are strong and that mandate improvements when a street is rebuilt. Bikes should be part of climate initiatives. If your policymakers are passing legislation to deal with the climate crisis, we have suggestions for how bikes should be a part of that, including e-bike incentives, of course. And then also slower and safer speeds. And that's what this webinar is about. You can get all this information on our website. You can download the PDF with the model language, and you can find supplemental guides for each of the four policy areas with great talking points to help you win those policies. This presentation today is benefiting from three amazing speakers. We have Amy Cohen, who's the co-founder of Families for Safe Streets, based in New York, but working nationally to help the families of victims of traffic violence make their streets safer so that other families don't have to suffer that same loss. Charlie Ream is now at the Oakland Department of Transportation. He will talk about his experience in Oakland and elsewhere, especially around getting emergency responders to support street changes that make traffic slower. Christopher Falcos is from the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. He will talk about what that state is doing to help local communities slow speeds in their towns. Massachusetts is one of the leaders in slow speed efforts. And then I'm going to start just by putting some things into context before I pass it off. Slowing speeds is so important. This chart shows that a small difference in speed can make a big difference in the chances of surviving if you get hit by a car. It's not just the speed of the car when it hits you. It has to do with the reaction distance and the braking distance. Shout out to the Vision Zero Network for these graphics and for their excellent work in helping slow speeds. This is another illustration of the importance of speeds from the Australian Department of Transportation.
What you're about to see will change your mind about speeding. Two identical cars, one travelling at 60, the other at 65. A sudden change in the road ahead, and both drivers first react, and then, a moment later, they brake. And things start to get interesting. Down here, the difference is extraordinary. In the last 5 metres of braking, you wipe off half your speed. So this car is still doing 32 k's when it hits. This one also hits, but only at 5 k's. So no matter how good a driver you are, 5 k's difference up there makes 27 k's difference down here.
Pretty sobering. They had another PSA that was more graphic that I opted not to show. Hopefully, this helps everyone understand how important it is to slow people down even a little bit. There are two best ways to get speeds to slow down. One is, and the most important, is to design for slower speeds. Things like raised crosswalks, things like filters at intersections to prevent cars from going through, slow cars down in both directions. Things like traffic circles or speed humps with cut-throughs for bikes. These are just some examples. Another example is chicane, so-called horizontal deflection that makes drivers slow down. I'm not going to go into these things in detail because you can find much more information in the National Association of City Transportation Officials, NACDO's Urban Street Design Guide. They have all of the details that you need to build these things correctly. If your community is not using the NACDO guide for your city and instead perhaps the AASHTO guide, the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, get them to use the NACDO guide instead. The NACDO guide is the street design guide for people who want to live on their street and not just drive through it quickly. The other, one more thing about design is slow streets. I'm mentioning this especially because since the pandemic, it's become a really important way to create slow speed bikeway networks. These are some examples from San Francisco and Chicago. This is some examples from San Francisco and Oakland, California. I took that picture on the left. I was just struck by the beauty and bliss of a father biking with his child down the middle of the street because speeds were slow. That's how our communities can be. It brings out folks to have slow streets. It's really important. These are a couple of signs that indicate the slow streets. I like the one on the right. Oakland is the cool town. It's important because you can actually build bikeway networks. Obviously, these networks show a lack of connection, but they also show big sections of streets that are connected. And if you can slow streets in a connected way and then make the connections with protected bike lanes or whatever, you can actually use slow streets to build a bikeway network that lets people go to wherever they need to go. The other way to slow speeds is to set lower speed limits. There's two strategies for that. One is to remove or soften the 85th percentile rule. That's the rule that requires policymakers to set the speed limit at the speed of the third fastest car out of 20. The old-fashioned way of doing it, and the National Highway Association, the NISA suggests a different process. California and other states have begun to change the rules about how you set speed limits. You can find information about that on our website in the model policy language section. And the other thing is to allow 20-mile-per-hour speed limits. 20 miles per hour is the top speed of a class 1 or class 2 e-bike, coincidentally, and it is the speed that makes it very safe for people to share a street when there's otherwise no infrastructure. Some examples of slower speed limits. Good news, and we'll pass this off to Amy after I mentioned Sammy's Law, which passed just last year, or just this year in New York City, that lets New York set speed limits to 20 miles per hour. And with that, I'm going to pass off the presentation to Amy Cohen.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Now I am just going to share my screen. And give me one sec. There you go. So I just want to tell you a little bit about Families for Safe Streets and give some context to the, wonderful introductory remarks from Dave. We're the group no one should ever have to join. We all lost a family member in a traffic crash or suffered a life-altering injury. And our mission is to confront the preventable epidemic of traffic violence through advocacy and support. And we use that language very intentionally because there's so much complacency around this crisis. We share our stories to say that the current complacency is not okay. We need urgent action. And one of the reasons we share our stories is because data has shown that when you talk about this issue, you don't reach decision makers the same way than if you really put heart and soul into it and show what is the price for failing to act. It's 20 times more effective than data alone. So I'll tell you my story. This was my son. He was an amazing kid, smart, an athlete. This may have been the year that he would have ridden cross country with my husband. That was always the plan. We are, I'm on for PeopleForBikes, so I will share that, we are a biking family. We biked to work for many years, my husband and I. The kids took up cycling. You can see a photo of us, biking around the Netherlands. We went on many cycling vacations. And, Sammy was just driven. And just a few weeks before he died, an example of that determination was that he wanted to ride the 100-mile New York City Transportation Alternative Century Ride. And I was like, really? You didn't really even train for it? But he was on a few different competitive sports teams. And like 2 weeks before he got into it and did some training. And I got a call after a few hours from my husband, was like, we're at mile 75. He's sprawled on the ground. I think we're coming home. And Sammy's like, what? We're not going home. And he got back on his bike and he finished the ride. He deserved a chance to grow up. October 8th will mark 11 years since he died. And it's a heartache no one should have to endure. And sadly, it's happening way too often in the United States. We perform abysmally as a nation compared to every other industrialized nation. We perform at the bottom compared to 28 other high-income nations. Double that of Canada, most of Europe, 2, 3, 4 times. And it's because they are putting in place the main pillars of managing safety over speed: design, setting safe speed limits, and using technology to manage speeds. And here's just some examples of the kind of work that we do at the local and national level. Our members in San Diego recently had a big win to redesign, the city legislature in San Diego committed to redesign the 15 most deadly intersection, the Fatal 15. At the national level, we're advocating for a bill named after one of our members that would just make it easier to get that funding out from IIJA by changing the rules around the match requirements. As Dave mentioned, we did just have a big win for a bill named after my son, giving New York City local control to be able to reduce the speed limit to 20 miles per hour. Simultaneously, we did get the rest of the state of New York to have authorization to be able to go to 25. And I will share, there was a big pushback, oh, but you still had to show the 85th percentile. I did want to just follow up that the new MUTCD has really good language around needing to take context into account. And as a result, there are now dozens of communities around New York State that have lowered their speed limits to 25. And finally, a new option that really is not discussed very often is putting in place speed limiting technology in vehicles so that people get either a reminder, an audible or visual cue, or in some instance really can't exceed the speed limit at all by this technology called intelligent speed assistance. And I have an action alert here because there's a bill in California right now that has a few more days for the governor to sign or veto that would require the passive ISA. So it'd just be like a beep if you're going 10 or more miles over the speed limit. And I hope you'll sign our petition. We have over 4,000 signers on it, and we're really trying to get Governor Newsom to act. It would be national precedent setting and spur other states to take action as well as the federal government. Couple other just quick things. We do have a two-part mission, and there's a lot of you out there, and I'm sure in your work you come across other people like me, part of the horrible club. And I have to say from personal experience, no one should ever endure this alone. We do provide a range of support services, and we are here to support family members. We have a story map where people can share their story, and you can look and see other people in your community who you may want to reach out to through us to help have, the wind out your sails. If you're a government agency person trying to make change, please know we're here to help you. And if you're an advocacy organization, we'd love to plug them into your local advocacy work. And finally, we encourage everyone to mark the International World Day of Remembrance. We have a range of resources on the website that's listed there, wdorusa.org, including a toolkit and more to help you have a WDOR event in your community. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you, Amy. Let's hear from Christopher.
Okay.
Welcome, Christopher.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen real quick. Okay. All right. So, hi, everyone. I'm Chris Falcos. I work at Massachusetts Department of Transportation. And as Dave said, we're one of the leaders when it comes to the lowest amount of traffic fatalities in the country. However, even though we're a leader, that is pretty much meaningless when we still have traffic fatalities on our roadways. So we always see that there's ways to improve, to make changes to reduce fatalities and injuries. And as a department, we have adopted the safe systems approach as a way of reducing traffic crashes on our roadways. And I'm just going to go over kind of some of the policies, some of the directives that we've done to kind of find ways to reduce these crashes by reducing speeds on our roadways. So this is not a new word, target speed. I'm sure most of you know what it is. It's basically the speed that we've selected that we want vehicles to drive. The big change is how we're using it in our process. Massachusetts had a project development design guide from 2009 that had language on target speed, but now we're putting a much bigger emphasis on it. We're putting it in our main chapter for speeds and everything, and we're now using target speed to inform our design speed rather than the other way around. So another thing that we're doing is we're making sure to define terms that are generally used in our design and making sure people understand what they are. So operating speed is the measured speed at which a driver is observed operating their vehicles in fair weather conditions. Design speed is the speed selected, is a selected speed used to determine the various geometric design features of a roadway. And then speed limit is the maximum lawful vehicle speed for a particular location as displayed on a regulatory sign as approved by MassDOT per Mass General laws or statutory limit as established per MGL. So those are just terms that we're using, but they're meaningless unless we actually show why these speeds matter. So this is a graphic that we've added into our project development design guidelines that shows what happens when you start to increase your speed. So as you can see here, as vehicle speeds increase, your perception of your cone of vision starts to decrease. What you see around you starts to decrease. So you really don't have the ability to see what's going on or perceive what's going on around your vehicle. At 40 miles per hour, very difficult to see people at the crosswalk, and you're really only seeing people who are directly in front of you. And then, as Dave showed in the graphic, speed limits are not just an enforcement thing. It's also a public health issue. With the faster a vehicle goes, the more likely a pedestrian is to be seriously injured or die in a crash. So we're making sure that this kind of language is up front and center when we're talking about speeds on our roadways and everything. The RMV has a new driver kind of guidance paper that tells new drivers about operating vehicles, getting their license and everything. And until recently, we only discussed speed limits as in an enforcement lens. But now we've changed all the language to say how higher speeds also increase the chances of fatality and injuries. So we're changing the discussion and the policies of speed across design and also driver language. So speeds are, as many of you know, should be appropriate for the context. When you're in a rural area where there's no pedestrians, no bicyclists, no one really on the roads, higher speeds are a little bit more palatable. But when you're in a dense urban area or a residential area, speeds should be lower to the point where there is less of a chance of mistakes being made on our roadways becoming fatalities. And the vicious cycle. This is something that many of you might have experienced or have seen many times with design. When you're designing a new project, you get the 85th percentile, and you put your design speed 5 miles per hour over that because that was what was seen as being safe. We were being safe by designing our roadways for somebody who's driving faster. But the problem with that is every time we put a design speed higher than the speed limit, we're now making the road more comfortable to drive faster. So then every single time the speed just keeps going up and up and up. So we're changing how we discuss this. We're proactively changing our design practices to promote good driver behavior and to reduce speeds. So this is a great example of one of the ways we're reducing speeds through speed management countermeasures. This is a pretty rural area in Princeton, Massachusetts. It's a rural road that enters a village. So in this area, we've added smaller lane widths. We've added speed feedback signs, colored pavement in the center, and deflection in order to really try to slow people down. Another way to quickly improve pedestrian and bicyclist safety, over here we've done a road diet on US 44. We've moved the parking to the roadway side and put the bike lane on the other side of parking, and even added delineators to further separate the bicyclists from parked cars to make sure that people are safer when they're biking through their bike lanes. And then even with quick fixes, during the pandemic, we had a great grant program where we were giving cities and towns money to change their streets from roadways where people could cut through to pedestrian areas, even adding in temporary traffic circles to see how they work. And we're further recommending cities and towns to do this as a method to try out new countermeasures to see how they work in on their roadways. And then when they see what works and what doesn't work, they can more effectively design and install speed management countermeasures that will work and won't have issues with public perception. On the right is just an example of what happens when you put a nice new roundabout into a rural area. So as I mentioned, target speed versus design speed, they are two different things, but they're basically the same in the end. We want the speeds to be the same for our target speed and design speed to make sure that we don't have issues with speeding. So for target speed, we're going to be using target speed to select the type and frequency of speed management countermeasures, the type of facilities for vulnerable road users who are biking and walking through the areas, and the use of landscaping elements for people to kind of help to enforce the roadway context of the area. And then design speed will be used to design our roadside design criteria, our minimum curve radii, and yellow and all red clearance intervals for traffic circles. So, target speed now is part of the entire process of our design through scoping, pre-25%, all the way to PS&E. So just to quickly show you, it's included in our scoping section. We'll identify target speed and design speed ranges. We'll assess a target speed appropriate for the project in the pre-25% and finalize target speed and design speeds during that time period. In our 25% design, we'll be doing all our design based on the design speed, which is chosen based on target speed, as I mentioned before. And then through 100% PS&E, we'll confirm design elements meet the target speed and design speeds and use and determine user separation if necessary. And then our new policy is any project that identifies a design policy, any project that identifies a target speed for their design will now have a post speed zoning process to determine if we've met the target speed. And if we haven't met the target speed, we'll look into further speed management countermeasures to help to achieve that target speed. And then here we have just a quick table of our new speeds that we've determined are reasonable for the different locations. So we have our area types on the left, our type of roadway, so arterial roadway, collector roadway, and local roadway, and then the speeds that are determined to be appropriate for that context. We can choose anywhere between those numbers, or if we determine that we need to go lower, we are more than willing to go lower to ensure that everyone who is using our roadways are protected and safe. And that is my presentation.
Thanks, Chris. That's great. I'm sure people will have lots of questions that we will get to in the discussion. Charlie, tell us about your experience.
Great. Thanks, Amy and Chris, for sharing some national advocacy and kind of state focus on speeding. I'm here to share kind of a hyper-local example of how Oakland has come to some agreements with our fire department, our emergency operations folks on street design elements, and I hope that some of this work can influence other similar conversations in the nation. So I'm going to burn through this presentation, but I'm happy to share any of the slides or on the documents I'm speaking about at a later time. So, I think we all, working in this field know that there is a tension between, most DOTs and most emergency response departments. I think we can all agree that wide streets equal more speeding, equal more severe injuries and fatalities. So most DOT really are focused on how to narrow roadways, how to, create safer crossings, how to work at conflict points. Whereas most fire departments are really risk and change averse, focusing mostly on maintaining existing service levels and meeting their national response time requirements. I think we all look forward to a future where everyone has battery-powered Japanese fire trucks that are 20 feet wide or 20 feet long that have tight turning radii. But until that day comes, I'm really focused on what we can do within the existing legal framework, which really comes down to national and state fire codes. Most of my arguments with fire departments over the last 10 or 11 years have been focused on these two dimensions, which really define in areas with short buildings of less than 30 feet, you need to have a roadway that has an unobstructed clear width of 20 feet wide. In all areas of taller buildings like downtown Oakland, many of our downtowns, you need to have 26-foot unobstructed clear width. I think we would all agree that 26-foot wide roadway encourages speeding. 20 feet is better, but in some cases like pedestrian crosswalks still leaves room for improvement. And so I'm going to go through a few graphics here that outline some key conversations and agreements we've come to with Oakland Fire Department. If I can, pass along one piece of information, it is really to ask questions about numbers and figures that you see in the code and really get down to the meat of the why. Okay, so here's a typical street, less than 30 feet in height. We have a 42-foot wide roadway, two 12-foot wide travel lanes. Okay, so there's a fire at mid-block. Fire engine pulls up, starts deploying equipment. Another vehicle, be it an emergency responder, a passenger vehicle, ambulance, police car, really just needs to get around that stopped fire engine or ladder truck. So really this 20-foot clear width is a 10-foot space for a truck to park and a 10-foot space for a vehicle to pass. This may seem like a rather mundane agreement, but this has really formed the basis for a lot of cooperation between ODOT and OFD. See how this works? We have an intersection crosswalk. What would previously have been illegal to put based on the fire code requirement of 20-foot unobstructed clear width now becomes easy to agree on because we have a 10-foot space for a fire truck to park and a 10-foot space for a vehicle to pass. Similarly, in areas of tall buildings, the 26-foot clear minimum is really just broken down into the added width needed for a ladder truck to deploy outriggers, which is 16 plus that 10-foot passing width. So again, if I can just pass on one piece of information, it is to come to some kind of agreement about the operational underpinnings of fire code and emergency response regulations. Those agreements really open the door for more minute conversations about details that can really save lives. So where do we go from there? We put these things in writing for future staff. It's not an MOU, it's an agreement. It's only an agreement if both sides agree. But these memos really provide a foundation for project review and for more in-depth understanding and discussion about both emergency operations and street design. So just to share two memos that we've recently gotten signed by the Oakland Fire Department. The first is a pedestrian safety island memo, which really allows at marked crosswalks a delineation of space that is a pretty great interpretation of the fire code for safety. These two figures, figure 1 and figure 2, outline that within a certain distance of a marked crosswalk, you can split that unobstructed clear width into two 10-foot zones, which really allows for us to put pedestrian safety islands, medians, hardened center lines at most crosswalks around the city of Oakland, pretty much by right. And as I said, this establishes a foundation for review. This doesn't say that the fire department will review every location, but it provides a great starting point. At tall buildings, same figure, just outlines 16 feet on either side of a concrete median. These have already produced measurable results. So in the summer of 2024, we finished two projects, the High Street paving project and the 8th Street West Oakland traffic calming project, both of which employed understandings from this memo to install concrete elements in the roadway that would previously have required in-depth conversation, site visits, a lot of discussion, but we can now just point to a memo that forms a foundation for these approvals. Second agreement that we've worked on and gotten signed by the fire department is an agreement related to flex posts in the right-of-way. These are important tools, easy to install, easy to maintain and replace, provide the level of protection for bikes, provide the level of protection for bus-only lanes and hardened center lines, and have many applications. We used to go back and forth about these with the fire department. We started meeting in the field at some install locations to look at how emergency operations interact with these temporary measures. And that led to a series of figures and another memo that we signed that really gives us a lot of flexibility in the placement of these devices. Here's a graphic that shows that we can basically place them anywhere that we want in the roadway as long as we maintain a certain spacing between the plastic bases. This paved the way for, in August 2024, the installation of a series of flex posts along International Boulevard, which is the deadliest roadway in the city of Oakland. These provide a level of separation for a bus-only lane and discourage illegal speeding in that bus-only lane. So, we're trying to keep the ball rolling. Here's a few upcoming ideas I have for future agreements about mountable medians, speed cushions on collectors and minor arterials, roadway closures, traffic diversions, and really just encouraging everyone here to keep the conversations going with their fire department. Keep asking why. And then once you have the why, it really opens the door for these discussions, agreements, and collaboration that can lead to, slower speeds and safer streets. So, thanks everyone for your time today. I'll turn it back to Dave for some discussion.
Great, thank you. So fantastic. We have a good 20 plus minutes for a conversation, and y'all are asking some great questions, which we'll get to. I want to start with Amy. And Sammy's Law is so important. And thank you so much for your advocacy on that. Can you please share with us what was the most important strategy in getting that law passed?
Well, I will start with, it should not take so long to make change. It was unfortunately, a multi-year legislative fight. But there were a few, key pivotal moments. First, I will say, having family members share their stories publicly in meetings and rallies and vigils was very helpful, but also we built really an unstoppable coalition. We do not do this work alone. We work in partnership with other organizations, and we had over 100 organizations signed on in support of Sammy's Law, including, which is critical for New York, some powerful unions, civic organizations. We built support from organizations in the communities where people were opposed. So in Eastern Queens, where more people drive, there were legislators who were very resistant and holding up the bill. And we got dozens of organizations in their communities signed on that they listened to, and that really turned the tide.
Great, thank you. Charlie, I want to follow up on something that you said about the memo and how it eased the approval of things like soft hit posts and speed humps and stuff like that. That's fantastic, and frankly, hard to believe. Can you share how an example of how your department was able to put something in without the fire department having a site visit? Like, how do you balance the memo, which says that it's not blanket approval, with the foundational agreement that the memo encapsulates?
Sure. Yeah, so we have monthly meetings between OCDOT and OFD with the fire marshal and myself and other project managers and designers. This is an opportunity to, share space and talk about projects, go over designs and policy questions. Felicia Bryan, our fire marshal, is a great listener and a great collaborator. And these memos, really have come in a big way in these project meetings. So when we agree on a memo, a key next step is that, both the fire marshal and our OCDOT director send out to all staff, with a description of what the memo says and what it does. We also host a series of meetings to, get people up to speed on how this applies and, really what it means. So I think getting the information out that this agreement exists to all parties involved is a really key step in the process. And from there, at these monthly project review meetings, for the High Street project, for example, we put up project designs, we show them to, Fire Prevention Bureau, plan check engineers, operations folks who actually are out in the field. We say, hey, here's our project. Here are the areas where, we would require an interpretation of the fire code, to allow for approval. And then here's how they fall under the tenets of this operational agreement, this memo that was signed. And from there, it's usually a pretty simple approval process. We give 2 weeks or so for fire department to come back with comments. Areas where previous agreements have covered operational understandings usually receive no comments. If there is a need to follow up, we usually schedule a follow-up meeting or a small site visit to kind of go over. But it has provided a really streamlined way to talk about these things as various staff come on board or as various new staff turn over at the fire department, it's really great to have something to point to.
I've been corrected that this is a 45-minute webinar. We are tight with our timing here. Very valuable minutes. Chris, could you share an example of resistance that you might have gotten from a local community about some of the things that you are encouraging them to do to slow speeds and how you overcame that resistance? And I'll ask you to address particularly rural arterial roadways in response to a question in the chat.
Yep. There's too many accounts of resistance towards any kind of speed management countermeasures. One great way that we got around some resistance. So a great example is actually roundabouts. We have for a long time we've used roundabouts in Massachusetts, and even though Massachusetts has a pretty strong history of using roundabouts, there are still some towns that are vehemently anti-roundabout, and many of them are fire chiefs. And one of the ways that we've successfully gotten many fire chiefs to be on board with roundabouts is to actually bring them to locations near them in neighboring towns to drive their fire apparatuses through the roundabouts to see how effortless it actually can be. A lot of their opinions have been tainted through earlier roundabout designs that didn't have truck aprons, but now we've learned from previous mistakes in the past, and it has gone a long way to really cement or really help getting fire and emergency response on our side. And also what we've determined a lot of times is early engagement with the fire department makes it much easier to get them to accept or be on board with speed management countermeasures, kind of like what Charlie was saying.
Great, thank you. Last chance for questions. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us for this webinar. As I said, we thank the Bike Industry Trade Association members. We also rely on your support. If you have not signed up for our list, most of you probably are, because that's how you heard about this. But if you heard about this in some other way, please go to PeopleForBikes.org and scroll down to the bottom and sign up for our list so that you can be informed of future webinars. I also want to give a shout out to the advocacy training that we are giving starting. There's 3 sessions. The first one is on September 30th. 3 fantastic 1-hour-long training sessions on how to become a fantastic bike advocate. The first one is about messaging. It's going to be the best online training you can have, I promise. So I put a link there to the registration page for that. Please do sign up. And with that, I will thank our team in the background. Toby DePaw is handling a lot of details in the background. Thank you, Toby, and thank you to the whole People for Bikes team, and a special thank you to Amy, Christopher, and Charlie for joining us. And with that, I'll sign off. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.